So this video is going to cover subsetting data. So we want to make sure that the library Rio is open and that you have this changed to whatever the name of your data set is, and go ahead and get that imported so it's showing up over here in your environment. So sometimes we just only want to work with part of our data set. When Rick created our individual data sets, this is an example of subsetting, creating a smaller data set with only some of the cases, or only some of the variables, or only some of the cases and only some of the variables. In this example, he selected specific variables, but random cases. Normally, you're going to have specific cases that you want in your smaller data set that you select depending on the value of a specific variable. So like all cases that are female, or all cases that are Republican, or all cases that are female and Republican. So to get started, we're going to recode gender into just the variable female, like we talked about last week. And then remember the first week back from the first week, we have this bracket operator that allows us to get particular pieces of an object. So for a vector, we just need to tell it which item in the vector that we want. So in this variable, which each variable is its own vector, we want row 5. If we want a value from a specific cell in a data set, then we need to tell it which column and which row. And actually it goes row first, then column. So my data, in the data set my data, we want row 5, column 38, 238, sorry. And this is just because we just created this female variable, so it's the very last, I know it's the very last row in the data set. And we can see that we've pulled the same number. However, it's very unlikely that you're going to know exactly which column number that you want or which row you want when subsetting, or that you'll actually only even want a specific cell. You're going to want, several rows and probably several columns. So we replace the numbers with functions. So to start, we're going to take all of the observations in our data set that are Republican. So here we give the new data set a name, and then on the right we tell R that we want values, we want in my data, in that data set, we want rows in which party ID equals Republican. And then this comma sets off the rows from the columns, and since we actually don't list any columns in here, it's going to bring them all. So if we run that line of code, you see we have 314 observations of 238 variables. Yours may vary differently from mine, because again, we all have different data. But for you, these two should match your number of variables in my data and my data underscore rep. And then if you run a quick table of PID3, your number here should match Republican here. So if you want to specify only specific variables to bring into the new data set, then we use the concatenate function after the comma and list the variable names in quotes. So like this, we've added this C parenthesis, and then each of the variable names in quotes separated by commas, and then close parenthesis. So now if we run this, we still have our 314 observations, but we now only have just those 3 variables. We can also give this which function multiple arguments to select cases on. So if we want all of the cases that are Republican and female, now we name a new data set, and tell it that we want in the data set to grab from the data set my data rows in which party ID equals Republican, and my data equals where my variables where female equals 1. And then these 3 same variables, columns. So now we're down to only 144 observations, but we still have those same 3 variables. Now there's actually a subset function that you can use. So like this is just one way in which you can subset data. The subset function takes this format where you give it an X value, which is your data set name, a Y variable, which is the variable name, and then whatever value you want to select on for your rows. And then for your columns, you're going to add this argument select equals, and then that same concatenate function to list your different variables that you want to pull. So it looks very similar. Here's, we're still naming it like we always do. Subset, give it the data set name, party ID equals 3 equals Republican, and then select these 3 same. And you see we still have this 314 observations with 3 variables. And then you add additional arguments to this to tell it more specifically which cases to pick, just by adding and whatever your additional argument happens to be. And you see this also did not change. We still have the 144 observations of 3 variables. Now, suppose you've created a couple of data sets from your data, and you decide, oh, I want to merge them together. We've got maybe 3 or 4 variables in one and 3 or 4 variables in the other, and you actually just want a little bit bigger data set with all of that information in it. You can merge those together, but you will need a common column to merge on. You can't just put them together however you want. You need to make sure that the correct observations are kept together. Most surveys have some sort of unique identifier for each observation. ANES calls it the case ID, but this is actually not one of the variables Rick included in our data, so we have to create our own, which is done by this function here. So we're creating a variable called ID, and then this seq underscore along function says to start with 1 and then populate it growing from there. So if you pop back into my data and bring that up here, and you just click this double arrow key to the right to take you all the way to the end, you can see that it's created this column that starts with 1 and then just gets bigger. Now each row has actually a number assigned to it. So now if we create a subset of Republicans with these variables in it, and make sure that we include our new ID variable. So now we've got my data rep A with 6 variables, and then another with all of these variables in it, making sure that we again include the ID variable. So when we have my data rep B that has another 6 variables in it, and we decide we actually want all those variables in one data set, we can merge them together with the merge function that we saw in one of our earlier weeks, week 1 or week 2, I can't remember. But so now we've just got this main my data rep data set, and the merge function just takes the one data set and the second data set. And since the common column has the same name in both data sets, we don't need any additional arguments. And if we run that, we see now we've got this my data rep over here that has 11 variables. So it's not 12 because, of course, one of those was the same in each. So you've got ID plus the 5 others and ID plus the 5 others. So you've got the 10 and then just ID one time. If by chance these 2 data sets happen to have the common column be named something else, like say one of them is ID and one of them is UID for unique ID, then you just add these 2 arguments here, telling it which column in the X data frame, which is the first one you list, and which column name in the second data frame, which is the Y column that you list here. So you can run that, but it's not really going to do anything. It's just you're adding the argument that it doesn't need. So, and then you probably want to, and I didn't do it in the last video, but since we did create that female variable here, you probably want to export the data set to your working directory so that it retains the new variables that you've created.